Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I am your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 29 of the 2024 podcast series, where we take a look at the draft-eligible prospects and get you ready for the NFL draft. And we're less than a week away from the start of the NFL draft in Detroit, Michigan. Thursday, April 25th. The countdown is on. And what I like to do every year is play the NFL draft by the numbers. Analytics have their fun with the numbers. We know that throughout the year. Pro Football Focus and a lot of the other analytics firms, they do a great job with producing a lot of the content. I want to take a look at the draft in a little bit of a different light when we talk about numbers. Specifically, I want to take a look at each position and take a look at, just what does history tell us? Trending over time, the last 3 years, the last 5 years, at each position. How many players came off the board in each round and overall in the draft, and see if we can end up slotting some of the players this year into each of those categories. See if we can ultimately predict the results of the NFL draft. We may not be able to predict the exact team, but can we get close to predicting the rounds that a lot of these guys are coming in, or at least the number of players in each of those rounds? So we've taken a look at the entire offense. We're now moving to the defensive side of the football. And we're going to start with the defensive end position. And when we talk about defensive end, really what I'm using to go back in history is drafthistory.com. If you haven't been there, drafthistory.com is phenomenal. Using the defensive ends in that website, really what they've determined to be defensive ends. Dallas Turner this year, obviously not a defensive end. Really, he should be considered a linebacker, and he is for the sake of this. But when you look at drafthistory.com, where did they have Will Anderson Jr.? They had him slated as a linebacker. So we've got the same situation with Dallas Turner as well. So I think that makes a lot of sense following the defensive ends. And really, again, in order for us to really get a good idea of what's going to happen in this year's draft, what does history tell us? What does history say? Obviously, there are moves that are unprecedented. We saw 5 quarterbacks come off the board in the top 15 picks. We may see 7 wide receivers taken in this year's draft. But more often than not, history really tells us. You look at things over the last 3-5 years, and you see the same patterns developing. So let's dive into this group. Let's take a look and see what we can do with this defensive end group. So when we talk about defensive ends, first round, last 5 years, you're looking at about 4 first rounders. 3-year average bumped up a little bit to 4.7 because we've had 5 in each of the last 2 seasons. Now, when you're looking at that group, last year you had Tyree Wilson, Lucas Van Ness, Will McDonald, Miles Murphy. So that was the group, and then Felix Anudike-Uzomah. Can't forget FAU. Those were the 5 that came off the board in round number 1 the previous year. That was Trayvon Walker, Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau coming off the board in the top 5. Jermaine Johnson, George Karlaftis following up right after that. So obviously very heavy, right at the top. With the first round defensive ends. You look at 2021, this is where we saw Jalen Phillips, Kwity Paye, Peyton Turner, Gregory Rousseau, the depth there at the top. Not what you would have liked to have seen there in 2021, obviously. 2020, just the 2. Chase Young, K'Lavon Chaisson. And then in 2019, obviously we saw another 5. This was the Nick Bosa draft. Bosa, Cleveland Ferrell, Rashawn Gary, Montez Sweat fell to number 26 overall to the Commanders, and then L.J. Collier, 29 overall to the Seahawks. Not every pick translates to the next level, but overall, when we talk about the 23 draft, 23 defensive ends taken. 2022, there were only 19. 2021, the depth wasn't there at the top of the draft, even though we did have 4 come off the board. The draft overall lacking some of that true depth. I think there were teams that were just kind of grasping and trying to bring in some guys taking a lot of different shots all over the place. 2020, 24, and then 2019, 18. So we're looking at right around between 22 and 23. 3-year average is 23. 5 years at a 22. So 22 to 23. When we look at this year's draft class, I've got 22 penciled in right now. So we're hitting right around where the average is. Go figure. It seems like every year I get pretty close to the average, and then the average gets blown out of the water when we actually get to draft time. But let's take a look at 2023. We walk through this draft, and some guys that have stepped up in a big way, other guys that we're still waiting for them to come along. After the 5 that came off the board in round 1, Isaiah Foskey, battled I think some injuries. He only played in 10 games, didn't record a sack. There's Keon White and a Laiatu LAtu for the Chargers. This guy looks like an absolute keeper. He was one of my favorite guys coming out of USC. 54 overall, number 8 defensive end. Nice pickup there. You got Zach Harrison with the Falcons. Question's going to be, really in terms of his fit there with the Falcons going into the 2024 season. Byron Young for the Rams in round 3. Number 77 overall, and was a good compliment there to Kobe Turner getting after the quarterback. Yaya Diaby, look, he has a chance to start there for the Bucs with Shaquille Barrett leaving. There's Dylan Horton, Tavius Robinson, Isaiah McGuire, Viliami Fehoko, Tyler Lacey in round 4, KJ Henry, Mike Morris, Robert Beal in round 5. Look, Carl Brooks in round 6 from the Packers. This is a guy that I was a big fan of at Bowling Green, and look, playing really a 5 technique or a D tackle there for the Packers. He's looked good. Then you got O'Shawn Mathis, Andre Jones, and Derek Parrish to round that group out. Derek Parrish really could end up playing a fullback if he wanted to there with the Jags. 2022, again, Walker Hutchinson Thibodeau. Then you look in round 2, you got Josh Paschal, Sam Williams. Round 3, Alex Wright, Cameron Thomas, and Myjai Sanders. Thomas is a reserve there. Myjai Sanders has actually moved on. I believe he's in Houston now. Ioma Wazurike, Michael Clemens, Sezi Adamewo, Dominique Robinson, and Kingsley Enagbare taken in rounds 4 and 5. Enagbare, JJ Enagbare, he's a guy that's gotten to see the field a little bit. Michael Clemens has seen some time with the Jets, but again, a group that we're still waiting to really emerge. There's Amare Barno in round 6, Isaiah Thomas, Daniel Hardy, Andre Anthony. That was a group, again, only 19 drafted. 2021, after Phillips, Pay, Turner, and Russo, you had Deo Odembo. And Deo, this is a guy who was injured. Didn't really, I don't believe he played at all his rookie year, but he's a guy that's showing up pretty well there for the Colts. Colts taking 2 guys in the first 2 rounds. Really needed to shore up that pass rush. Boogie Basham, also in round 2. You got Joseph Osai. I think he's really famous for that bonehead play, hitting Patrick Mahomes out of bounds when they could have won that playoff game. Malcolm Kuntz has looked good at times there with the Raiders. You got Chauncey Golston, Patrick Jones, Ronnie Perkins in round 3, Cam Sample, Ellerson Smith out of Northern Iowa, Jordan Smith, Janarius Robinson, Rashad Weaver, Joshua Kando, Isaiah Loudermilk, has seen some time there with the Steelers. Then you got Dalen Hayes, Ernest Brown, Ade Ogundeji, Taron Jackson, Quincy Roche, Wyatt Huber, Jonathan Cooper, all the way down in round 7. This is the guy that's starting for the Broncos. And then William Bradley King and Shaka Toney, and then Marcus Spencer. Look, a lot of names that I just rattled off there, those 28. Not many guys are really stepping up, playing well. Rashad Weaver was a nice 4th-round pick by the Titans, 35 overall. He's been making some plays. But again, not a group that screams playmakers. 2020, Chase Young battled some injuries, just really hasn't lived up to the hype. Kalavan Chason, was that undersized edge rusher. He's actually a backup now. I want to say it's in Carolina. I can't remember for sure. Yetur Gross-Matos, he's moved on from the Panthers. He was taken at number 38. Marlon Davidson. Then you got Darrell Taylor, who showed up pretty well there for the Seahawks. He and A.J. Epinesa taken towards the back half of round number 2. Epinesa to the Bills. You got Julian Okwara, who's a backup with the Lions. Jabari Zuniga. Terrell Lewis. There's Anthony Jennings. Jonathan Grenard, number 90 overall. There to the Texans, led the team in sacks, ends up getting a nice little deal, bump and pay, going to the Vikings. And then 12 picks later at 102 overall, you got Alex Highsmith to the Steelers, DJ Wonnum, 117 overall. I think he's with the Panthers now after an 8-sack season. Then you got James Lynch, Khalid Kareem, Alton Robinson. He had a good year there, 1 year with the Seahawks. Jason Strowbridge, Curtis Weaver, Michael Dana. Again, you can find guys in all 3 days of the draft. Michael Dana, number 177 overall. He has a chance to start there this year for the Chiefs. Bradley Anai, Kenny Willekes, James Smith-Williams, Jayshon Cornell, Jonathan Garvin. Again, a lot of guys on here, some depth filler, guys that aren't on rosters anymore. I think the jury's out with a lot of these draft classes at the edge rush position. 2019, this was an interesting draft for sure. Because you have Bosa, Gary, Sweat, who panned out. Cleveland Ferrell is on another new team, his third team in 5 years. And then LJ Collier, has pretty much been a bust. Zach Allen now with the Broncos. He just continues to get better. You got Ja'Kai Polite, Jalen Ferguson, Max Crosby. Dude was taken as the number 9 defensive end in the 4th round, 106 overall. You heard some of the names that came off the board before him. The Raiders were smart enough to snatch him up. Anthony Nelson has been a nice reserve linebacker for the Bucs. Then there's Austin Bryant, John Kaminsky, who's actually gotten some playing time there with the Lions. He was actually drafted by the Falcons. He's been a starter there opposite Aiden Hutchinson. I think he's better as a guy coming off the bench. So hopefully the Lions will be able to address that position and get an upgrade there. Sharif Miller, Charles Omenihu has played a big role at 161 overall. Joe Jackson, Darrell Johnson, Quentin Bell, Jalen Jelks. So again, when you look at these draft classes, there are some names, some big winners in this group, but a lot of guys, a lot of really, just picks that ultimately didn't pan out, which tells you that when you're actually looking for these edge rushers and guys that are going to be getting after the quarterback, setting the edge against the run, it really can be a crapshoot at times because not everybody's game translates to the next level. And that's really the big thing that I think teams struggle to find is who's that guy going to be? Who's going to be that breakout star? Tyree Wilson, look, he may be playing D tackle there for the Raiders in 2024. Just really couldn't get things together. Battled an injury to start out. So obviously there's some concern there with Vegas. Can they get that number 7 overall pick going in the right direction? That's going to be a big question mark. So really when you talk about the edge rush position for 2024, who's going to be that guy? Who's going to be the one that's going to step up and carry the torch for this draft class? Dallas Turner's a linebacker, so we're not going to include him in here. But even if we did, I still believe that Laiatu LAtu is the best edge rusher and really the best defensive player in this year's draft. This is a guy that applies constant pressure on the quarterback. Medicals are checking out okay. I haven't seen anything that says that there are any issues. That head and neck injury, he was deemed unfit ultimately to play. He had to medically retire, but found that independent doctor to clear him. UCLA doctors cleared him, and he's been wreaking havoc in opposing backfields ever since. When you think about it, 114 total pressure, including 26 sacks, another 17 hits in his 2 seasons there at Westwood. 26.2 pass rush win rate this past season, tops among all prospects in this draft class as well. That's according to ProFootball.com. But Pro Football Focus. And when you talk about, just he's so good with his hands. Tremendous work, variety of ways attacking that man in front of him. You'll see combinations of violent swipes, clubs, chops, rips, arm overs. You'll see a quick slap and rip, and then he uses that outside arm to propel himself around the corner when he gets that rip. Uses that outside arm of that offensive tackle, really shortens that edge, flattens out, gets to the quarterback. A lot of people give him a hard time about not being the bendiest edge rusher. The hips aren't those like Dallas Turner, let's say, but he's far from being stiff hipped. You'll see him quickly flip those hips as he's putting stress on the outside edge, and he can dip, he can get underneath the pad level. He's got the power, he's got speed, he can attack you inside, he can actually attack you outside. He's got counter moves for you, spin moves. This guy does a little bit of everything. I think he's also solid against the run, but man, his ability to get after the quarterback is a thing to behold, because he just does it in so many different ways. He's so technically sound, and he's explosive. He's absolutely explosive. People were talking about, hey, he may not be the fastest guy. What are we going to see when he shows up at the combine? Are we going to see, what's that 40 time really going to look like? And I think he really silenced those naysayers with his performance at the combine. Not only did we get to see him in the drills look sharp like we were expecting, and I think there was no question about that, but when you actually allowed him to run that 40, runs the 4.6, 4.40, a 1.62, 10-yard split, plenty fast, and I think that really silenced all the doubters. Where could he go? Atlanta at 8, maybe. I still feel like Dallas Turner's going to be the guy there, but I'm looking at the Broncos there at 12, and I mentioned Jonathan Cooper. He's one of those guys that's there. When I think about what's going on in Denver, they could draft a quarterback. We know that with Russell Wilson gone. But is Sean Payton really going to reach for a quarterback? He's not going to do that. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Could they go corner? There's a lot of talent at that cornerback room, but you can add Quinyon Mitchell to the mix. But when I look at and I mentioned Jonathan Cooper, this is a group. Zach Allen, second straight year with 5 sacks. He's going to need some help up front. Might be a little bit too high for Byron Murphy. But then you look at, like I said, Cooper, Benito, they combined for 16.5 sacks and another 33 hits. Adding another piece. Look, Denver finished 21st in the league with 42 sacks. When you got to sit there and deal with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert twice, you've got to be able to put pressure on them, consistent pressure. And I think ultimately you get LAtu in there. That really solidifies that group. Next on my list is Jared Verse out of Florida State. 6'4", 254 pounds. When you saw this dude at the combine, he was doing some things that, frankly, we haven't seen a ton of. Again, 6'4", 254, 33.5-inch arms, runs a 4.5, 840, the 1.6, 10-yard split, a 35-inch vertical leap. Also puts up 225 31 times with those long arms. And, a 4.44 short shuttle, 7.31 three-cone drill. So a lot of people talk about, well, he's all power. There's no finesse to his game. He's plenty explosive. He's got plenty of speed. And, yes, he can set the edge. Yes, he's got power in his hands. But the athleticism was something that really was on display. And this is a guy that I think is scheme versatile. I think he can both put his hand in the dirt, much like LAtu can, but I think he could also be a stand-up outside linebacker. I really do. And really, I'm looking at the Rams. The Rams need edge rushers, right? And when the Rams went to the Super Bowl this last time, right? When they won the Super Bowl, you had Aaron Donald in the middle, which now you have Kobe Turner. But then you also had Leonard Floyd and Von Miller bending those edges, getting after the quarterback, and really made Joe Burrow's life miserable, but everybody in the playoffs had to deal with that defensive front. Now, if you've got Kobe Turner, you also have Byron Young, who played so well. 8 sacks as a rookie. Get another edge rusher in there to get that trio again, because that was the success in that Super Bowl. You bring that group again to the mix with Turner, Young, and Verse. I think you really have something there. So I think the Rams at 19, that feels like a perfect spot, perfect situation for Jared Verse. Look, Verse or LAtu could easily come off the board number 9 to the Bears. I want to make sure that I can't stress this enough. If Rome Odunze is still on the board, I think the Bears would be crazy not to take him, because you add him to the mix with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, and DeAndre Swift. Caleb Williams has one heck of a set of targets and weapons. That's a pretty explosive offense waiting for him in Chicago. But if he's off the board, what do they do? What do the Bears do? I think at that point, the Bears can take either LAtu or Verse to team with Montez Sweat. And then whoever doesn't get picked, ultimately, that's who the Broncos end up taking at 12. If not, could the Saints take him? Possibly. Could there be teams trading up? Possibly, but I think the Rams might end up getting that next guy that falls, if depending on what happens there. I think Chop Robinson is the next guy in line. 6'3", 254. Look, the production didn't match the potential, right? When you talk about Chop, I think you can't just look at all the stats, and to determine his effectiveness, right? If we just look at the stats, 4 sacks this past season, not overwhelming by any means. 20 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks in his 3 years, first at Maryland and then at Penn State the last 2 seasons. Nothing special, right? If you put on that game against Michigan, first 2 plays that J.J. McCarthy gets to drop back, Chop Robinson is right in his kitchen and probably would have been there the entire game because Carson Barnhart could not block him. At that point, Jim Harbaugh takes the ball out of J.J. McCarthy's hands and puts it into the running game. J.J. McCarthy only threw 8 passes the entire game. You want to talk about changing the complexion of a game? Chop Robinson was able to do that. I think the Rams are probably his ceiling at 19 if the big 3, Laiatu LAtu, Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, are off the board. If not, then I think Tampa is a match made in heaven. Tampa could go in a lot of different directions with this pick, but I think when you look at what Tampa has, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, he's managed just 13 sacks over his 3 seasons in the league. Does he deserve that starting spot? That's I think is still a question mark. It's up in the air. Yaya Diaby has emerged with the 7 sacks, so that kind of tempers losing Shaquille Barrett a little bit. But I think Chop Robinson would be a fantastic addition to this group. Now, I mentioned that we have 5 defensive ends come off the board in each of the last 2 rounds, and the 3-year average is 4.7. So there are 2 guys that I have coming off the board in round 2 that can easily move into round 1. Here's the reason why I'm not sure that that's going to happen. I think you're going to have 6 offensive tackles, 1 guard, and then potentially 2 centers. So that would already give you 9 guys, 9 spots in round 1. Then you're talking about up to 7 wide receivers. That would take you to 16. Then you got 4 quarterbacks. That's going to take you to 20, right? Then you get a tight end in there, so that's 21. And that's just the offensive side of the football. You throw in 2 defensive tackles that we know are going to be coming off the board. That brings you to 23. Then you've got 5 corners that make a lot of sense, should be drafted in round number 1. That now takes you to 28. There are 32 first-round picks. You're looking at essentially 4 guys. And that I threw Dallas Turner into that mix. Really, he's counted as a linebacker. So really, it gets down to just LAtu, Verse, and Chop Robinson. First time since 2020 that we would only have less than 4 defensive ends taken in round number 1. So Bralen, Trice, and Darius Robinson are the 2 guys that could very well come off the board in round number 1 if teams are looking at wide receiver class, it's deeper in round 2 than the edge rush position. Maybe I go with edge rush, and then I can get a receiver in round number 2. We can easily see that scenario playing out. So what I see there is, Bralen Trice is a guy. This wouldn't be a concession or anything like that if he were to fall. I think Arizona, you look at 35 overall, makes a lot of sense. Arizona needs to improve upon the 30th ranked pass rush from a season ago. Derek Gardeck paced the Cardinals with 6 sacks. Not a home, not a household name by any means, right? BJ Ojolari, Victor Dimukeje, and Zaven Collins combined for 11.5 sacks. They need an explosive edge rusher. And look, Bralen Trice, I've been a huge fan of his. 18 sacks, 28.5 tackles for loss with the Huskies. Doesn't look like he has ideal bend, but he has good power, handwork, speed coming off the edge. This dude also, the motor is non-stop. 66 total pressures, the most in the FBS per Pro Football Focus. I think Cardinals, they would easily take him here. Could they take him there at 27 overall? I think it's entirely possible. But you can get him there at 35. I think you definitely pull the trigger and you land him there. Could he come off the board in round 1? Sure. 6'3", 245. He's going to be an outside linebacker at the next level. Ran a 4.7, 240. Not the most explosive. He also had some trouble with some of the drills. That could potentially be a concern for scouts that might push him into round number 2. And then you look at Darius Robinson, 6'5", 285 out of Missouri. And this dude, he lined up all over the line. He can play D-tackle, he can play defensive end. I think ultimately 5 technique is going to be his home at the next level. I ran a 4.9, 140. But look, this guy has serious burst coming off the edge. You're going to see violent collisions. This dude beats you with excellent hands, and then he'll shoot into the backfield. But the power in his hands, you absolutely see that. And then, like I said, the athleticism. He'll even line out at a wide 9 technique, getting after the quarterback. Can be an interior pass rusher as well. Loves to attack the hands of the offensive lineman coming off the edge. Flexibility to bend the corner as well. 8.5 sacks this past season. Was dominant in the Senior Bowl. People couldn't block this guy. I look at Tennessee at 38 overall. If he doesn't come off the board in round 1, I think there are a couple of teams. I look at the Ravens potentially there at 30 if they don't go offensive tackle. I think the Ravens could end up taking Darius Robinson easily there at number 30, be an eventual successor for Brent Urban. But man, can you imagine Robinson teaming with Matabike? Good Lord, that would be a fun watch. But even looking at Tennessee, Denico Autry, top pass rusher, 11.5 sacks. He left in free agency. There's a large hole there at defensive end. Titans, if Darius Robinson does fall to round 2, you are jumping on him as quickly as possible and make sure you lock that guy up. And then Marshawn Nealon. Marshawn Nealon this dude's tough as nails. He feels like a Detroit Lion to me. Western Michigan, stay in state, 6'3", 267, excellent power in his hands, physical specimen, the physicality, the power at the point of attack, change of direction skills are off the charts as well. This is a guy, 702 3-cone drill, 418 short shuttle, fastest of anyone competing on Thursday, whether it's the D-line or the linebackers. Would have put him 4th among the running backs who participated in those drills as well. Put on a show at the Senior Bowl, getting the better of the tackles with a blend of speed and power. Would drive his man into the backfield with a bull rush on one play, and using that speed to get to the quarterback in a hurry on the next. Even had an impressive rep against Taliesin Fuaga, who a lot of people think could end up being a top 15 pick. Took him up the field, past the quarterback, showed an impressive spin move, took him right back to the quarterback. 12 sacks, 28.5 tackles for loss in his 4-year career. This is a guy that you put the film on. Numbers don't sound overly impressive, but put the film on. This guy's a lot of fun to watch. You add him opposite Aiden Hutchinson, and then you allow Kaminsky, Pascal, and Houston to kind of be those situational guys coming off the bench, those role players. And I think the Lions have upgraded that edge rush position, really getting Aiden Hutchinson some help. So in the first 2 rounds, we've got 6. Looking a lot more like 2019 that had 5. Nobody taken in round 2. 2022 there were 6. We saw 6 as well in 2021. We saw 7 in 2022 and 8 in 2023. So I look at this group, Adisa Isaac, Austin Booker, my next guys. I think they're coming off the board in round 3. I really do. And round 3, really if we look at the averages, we're talking about 2 guys coming off the board in round 2. I've got Trice, Robinson, and Nealon. We saw 3 come off the board last year in round 2. So round 3, the average is right around 4. We've got that. With Adisa Isaac, Austin Booker, Jonah Ellis, Brandon Dorlus in my group as of right now. So when you look at round number 3, and we talk about a guy like Adisa Isaac, 6'4", 247. This is a guy, look, he had 7.5 sacks of his own there in 2023. Just continues to develop, burst, bend, coming off the edge, getting to the tackle. I look at him, this guy was a beast against the run. 34% of his total tackles were made behind the line of scrimmage. Think about that. Commanders. If the Commanders don't end up landing Bralen Trice in round 2, then I think Adisa Isaac would be that guy there at 67 overall. I think that makes a ton of sense. Austin Booker's another guy that I think was really rising up draft boards. Didn't run the fastest 40 time, didn't look overly explosive, but if you watched him in the Senior Bowl, you saw that explosiveness coming off the edge. That was something that I thought absolutely stood out. I think this guy is going to end up being a third rounder. I think my current iteration of my mock draft has him going off the board in round 4. I've got him 108 overall in the mock. I think he'll end up being a third rounder. I think the hype with him is real. But the Vikings, I look at the Vikings, I think that's ultimately the right fit for Austin Booker, because you look at Daniil Hunter, DJ Wonham, they're gone, right, in Minnesota. 24.5 sacks gone. That's over half of the 43 sacks, right? You bring in Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel. These are guys who can get after the quarterback. I think they need to continue to address the position. Booker, look, transfer from Minnesota to Kansas. He's only a redshirt sophomore. This is a young kid, right? 8 sacks, 12 tackles for loss this past season, 56 total tackles, which finished 4th on the team as well. Burst, convert speed to power. Again, that 4.79 40. Don't really pay attention to that. I think third round ultimately feels right for Austin Booker. Then you look at Jonah Ellis. Jonah Ellis is a guy there for the Utes who I thought really came on and really played well. I look at the Bears. He's a little undersized, 6'2", 248, but if the Bears don't end up getting that edge rusher that they're looking for in round 1, 75 overall, Jonah Ellis makes a lot of sense. And when you talk about him, look, he emerged this year, 13 sacks this past season. Multiple sacks in 6 of the 11 games in which he played, battled some injuries, but tremendous burst coming off the edge. But it's that patented spin move that's so lethal. Gets those offensive tackles leading in one direction, uses that spin back the other way, creates that separation, clear path to close on the quarterback. To me, Jonah Ellis, round 3 makes a lot of sense. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be wreaking havoc in backfields. And then Brandon Dorlus out of Oregon. Look, 6'3", 283. What I like about Dorlus is just the fact that he is so versatile. This is a guy that can play inside, he can play outside. I think ultimately has a 5 technique. I think he can play that role. I look at Arizona. Again, if Arizona doesn't end up taking Darius Robinson, I look at Brandon Dorlus as a good fit. Yes, they brought in Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones and Kiaris Tonga, but Bilal Nichols actually got 5 sacks in 2020 at nose tackle when he was playing for the Bears. So I think Nichols can play nose tackle. You get Justin Jones. You get Brandon Dorlus there. I think that makes a heck of a lot of sense. Dorlus, look, he's one of the more versatile linemen in this year's draft. Quickness off the ball to beat interior linemen, convert speed to power to drive the offensive tackles back into the backfield, uses those those long arms to his advantage as well. 9 pass breakups this past season. Dorlus, I think, isn't getting out of day 2. So if we're scoring at home after those first 3 rounds of the draft, you're looking at 10. 10 total guys taken, and there were 8 in 2019. There were 12 in 2020, 11 in 2021. Now we had 10 in 2022. Again, that was a down year, only 19 defensive ends taken, and then we had 13 last year. I don't know that this draft class is nearly as strong as last year, even with Tyree Wilson coming off the board at the top. Hasn't really panned out. I think the overall depth of this class isn't quite as strong because you can make an argument for Trice and Robinson, But, in round 1, ultimately, I just don't see that happening. We get to round 4, and I'm looking at Mohamed Kamara. Yes, he's undersized at 6'1", 248, but, man, just put on that game against Colorado. I think everybody tuned in to watch that game, and you'll see a guy who was absolutely unblockable. Number 8 came to play, and he was living in the backfield. I think Shedeur Sanders saw Mohamed Kamara in his nightmares. Kamara delivered in his final season with the Rams. 14 sacks, 64 total pressures, both of which finished in the top 5 in the FBS. 19.4% win rate according to Pro Football Focus. Explosive first step, excellent bend, rips underneath the pad level, gains that edge, flattens out, chases down the quarterback in a hurry. Good power in the hands as well, can convert speed to power, driving the offensive tackle into the backfield using that leverage, attacking the chest. Can also be disruptive against the run with early penetration into the backfield, blowing up plays. So good with those hands, but if an offensive tackle engulfs him, he's dominated at the point of attack. But this is a guy I think will work well with the Raiders in space. Let him be an outside linebacker, come off the edge, and get to the quarterback. I'm looking at Baltimore. I just keep looking at them. Kyle Van Noy, the ageless wonder there, tallied a career-high 9 sacks. He's 33 years of age, though. Odafe Owe expected to take over for the departed Jadeveon Clowney. And his win rate was 17.7 according to Pro Football Focus, which ranked the top 15 in the league. 54 total pressures also put him among the top 20 among edge rushers, despite only starting 5 games. David Ojabo, though, played in 5 games in 2 seasons after tearing the Achilles at his pro day, and then an ACL tear after that. Can they count on him? Really don't know. And even if he does come back, I think Kamara will give them, the depth that's needed there. I think Kamara could be a guy that could be a starter at the next level. Javon Solomon out of Troy, another undersized dude, 6'1", 246 pounds. These guys both feel like 4th rounders to me. And with Solomon, I've got him penciled in with the Eagles. It just feels like the right fit, especially with Hassan Reddick ultimately getting traded to the Jets after his 4th consecutive year with double-digit sacks. Philly, Nolan Smith starting to step up. Brandon Graham's 36 years of age. They're going to need to find somebody to team up with Josh Sweat. You got Bryce Huff in there, 3-year deal, $51 million. Sweat, Huff, Smith. You add Solomon in there. I think that makes a lot of sense. Ultimately take that place of Brandon Graham. Solomon was so dominant as a pass rusher this past year at Troy. Explosive burst, impressive bend, racked up 16 sacks to lead the FBS. So good with his leverage, active with his hands. Athleticism in the run game to chase down ball carriers from behind. Number 120 overall to the Eagles, I think makes a lot of sense. And then you get into, here's another guy, Jalix Hunt out of Houston Christian. 6'4", 252 pounds. He's kind of a unique guy. I mean, is he a linebacker? Is he an edge rusher? Ultimately, he lined up with the defensive lineman, so that's kind of the position that I'm rolling with. I'm looking at Houston there at 127. I mean, they stay in state, really in the city with the Houston Christian product. And, Texans, look, they hit a home run getting Danielle Hunter to team with Will Anderson. They've got, Dylan Horton is the only other guy under contract beyond this season. I think they need to get another guy in there. Hunt, the converted safety, I think he excels in coverage. This dude's a twitchy athlete, 6'4", 40, 37-inch vertical leap. Still learning the position, but this guy can bend, use that length to his advantage. I think he's one of those guys that can end up being, one of those ascending prospects, and a guy that maybe he ends up moving to linebacker, but Henry To'o possibly end up taking over on that spot there. We'll have to see what happens, but man, he's playing for D'Amico Ryans. That's the right guy to play for. These are all guys that I think 4th round feels about right. You get into round 5, Brennan Jackson of Washington State, 6'4", 264. This guy is going to bring some power, some toughness, some intensity to any defensive line. And, I've got him slated to go into the Bills at 144 overall. Look, last year's sack leader was Leonard Floyd, not on the roster. A.J. Epinesa, Gregory Rousseau combined for 11.5 sacks. Von Miller played in just 12 games after that ACL tear. failed to record a single sack. Casey Toohill was brought in after a career-high 5 sacks last year at Washington. I look at Jackson. Look, he can bend a little bit getting after the quarterback. He and Ron Stone Jr. were a nice duo there at Washington State, with the Cougs up in the Palouse. I like that fit. He'll bring that toughness, that physicality that the Bills are looking for, really round out that edge rush position. Xavier Thomas of Clemson, 6'2", 244 pounds. Looked good at the combine. I thought he looked really athletic. The big question mark with Xavier is, can he stay healthy? That's the big question mark. I don't think there's any question that he has the talent, that he is athletic. But man, it's scary looking to take this guy because he's missed so many games. He just gives us those glimpses that he can be explosive coming off the edge. 18 sacks in his career there at Clemson. Those medical red flags, I've got him dropping to the middle of day 3, coming off the board at 175 overall. He's the guy that, depending on those medicals, how they check out, he may not even get drafted. I think there's enough there to work with. I'm looking at New Orleans, the trio of Carl Granderson, Cameron Jordan, Tasso Passanio, 14 sacks. Over half of those were Carl Granderson, 8.5. Last year's second-round pick, I mentioned Isaiah Foskey played in 10 games, didn't record a sack. Former first-rounder Peyton Turner played in just 2 games. He should be considered a bust at this point. You bring in Xavier Thomas, you allow him to take over for Peyton Turner. He can challenge Isaiah Foskey for playing time and really push, to get into that group. Tasso Passanio, ultimately you can end up being a guy that gets in with Granderson, who had a career year, and Cameron Jordan, eventually, hopefully be able to take over the reins for Jordan whenever he decides it's time to hang it up. Javonte Jean-Baptiste out of Notre Dame, 6'5", 239 pounds. This guy, he's got tremendous length. I think that's one of the things that you see from him with Jean-Baptiste. 33 3/4 inch arms, ran a 4.66 40. For that size, that's good movement skills. I think he's a guy that can end up being an outside linebacker in a 34 defense. This past season, after four years there at Ohio State, 10.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Look, at Ohio State in 4 years, 10 tackles for loss and 8 sacks, and 51 total tackles. 49 total tackles for the Irish. He finally got a chance to play in that final year, and he showed up really well. And I think this is a guy, round 5 just makes a lot of sense for me. I think that's the right fit. And then Brayden McGregor. I've been debating whether or not to put him in round 5 or round 6. Another guy with really good length, 6'5", 257. He was finally healthy towards the end of the year. And, I think that's really what's going to play to his benefit. I think, there's obviously going to be some recency bias, but he was a guy that battled some injuries. And look, you saw him there against Bama. Had 2 sacks in that game and got after Jalen Milroe in that semifinal. Consistent pressure. And look, I love the length. Again, he's not twitchy. He doesn't have tremendous power. Needs to add that play strength, but the motor's always running. And I think the best games of the season were at the end of the year. Iowa, Bama, Washington, when he was finally 100% healthy. I look at the Jags, right? The Jags are going to be, they've got Ryan Nielsen there. You got they're going to be a 4-down lineman, I think. So you got Josh Allen, you got Travon Walker coming off the edge. Those 2 guys, studs. 27.5 sacks a season ago. Depth is a concern. McGregor could be one of those guys. Look, Ryan Nielsen is a defensive lineman whisperer, and you allow him to work with McGregor, you may end up getting a steal there on day 3. You get into round 6, and Nelson Caesar of Houston, 6'3", 254, kind of a stiff-hipped edge rusher coming off the edge. But look, he still was very productive for the Cougars. I think that's one of the things that we can absolutely agree upon. 13.5 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks. Got better and better each and every year for the Cougars. I look at him, the Rams, I said they need edge rush help. I think they double dip, get another edge rusher. 209 overall feels right for Nelson Caesar. And then Miles Cole is an interesting dude. Is he a round 6 guy? Is he a round 7 guy? I ultimately have him coming off the board in round 6. I think just the athleticism is intriguing enough. I look at Miami as a potential landing spot for him. 7'3" wingspan, runs a 4.67 40 at 6'6" and 278 pounds. I think he could be a stand-up rush end, and then eventually convert to a 5 technique. Round 6, round 7, he's just one of those guys, one of those tweeners, probably at the back end of round number 6. Not a ton of production, but he's one of those guys that I think has some of those traits that teams are looking for. Iyabi Okianoma, another guy that has those traits, 6'4.5", 260 pounds. And, this is a guy that started his career, at Michigan, right? And ultimately transferred to Charlotte. And he started his career actually at Alabama in 2018. And then there's Michigan in 2022, and then to Charlotte. And in Charlotte, 11.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, ended up with 56 total tackles. And, this guy's a really good athlete. And he's one of those guys that I think a team would take a flyer on in round number 7. It just makes a lot of sense to me to take a chance on, a big physical guy that can come off the edge and put some pressure on the quarterback. Beyond that, Cedric Johnson of Mississippi, 6'3", 260. Cedric Johnson is a guy that could very well come off the board much sooner than where I have him slated. He's one of those guys that I think is more power than speed. I think there's some stiffness to his game. I look at the Colts. They could add some depth to their edge rush position. I think, with Kwity Paye and then Samson Ebukam having a good year. Deo Adengbo on that team as well. I think, you can always add edge rush help, and I think that would make some sense there. But, for me, when I look at Cedric Johnson, again, the stiffness, it definitely shows up. Not overly explosive, and that's really a concern for me, which is why I have him coming off the board so much later. This guy played linebacker at first at Ole Miss, and now he's moving to defensive end. 22 tackles for loss, 19 sacks in his career. Mostly a guy that's looking to get after the quarterback more than anything else. And at the combine, he was a guy, ran a 4.63 40. I was surprised, at the speed, 38-inch vertical leap. So I think some of those traits may actually get a team excited enough to take him in maybe the 5th round. But again, I worry about him at the next level, which is why I have him in round 7. Jalen Harrell of Michigan, 6'4", 250 pounds, another guy with good size, another guy that the production just wasn't always there at Michigan. 9 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, just 31 total tackles. This was a guy that basically was looking to get after the quarterback early and often. And, I thought he was up and down. I thought both he and Braden McGregor were up and down. I've got McGregor coming off the board sooner just because of the length. And I think, if he can add some of that play strength to his game, that really makes him intriguing. Jalen Harrell, 6'4", 250. He's got decent size, 37-inch vertical leap at the combine. But there wasn't anything special, wasn't anything flashy to his game. And that's really where, I worry a little bit, again, as he converts to the next level. So there's my 22, which again, average for the 5 years is 22, 23 in the 3-year average. So we're right there. The other names to make mention of, Eric Watts of UConn, 6'6", 274. He's a guy, if we're looking for another guy to throw into this group, I think Eric Watts could end up being that guy, be a late day 3 pick. 23 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks. Had his best year in 2022. Had 7 sacks that year. His play kind of took a hit in 2023 with just 6.5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. But he's one of those guys that has really good length. And I think that's what teams are going to be excited about when they watch Eric Watts, is that size, 35 3/4 inch arms, ran a 4.67 40, 36.5-inch vertical leap. So he's got some explosion to him. Change of direction is not his forte. He's more getting up the field. And so I think that's one of the things that may deter teams from wanting to take him. Priority free agent, though. He's a guy that I think could make a roster. There's Trajan Jeffcoat of Arkansas. I saw that he's been meeting with a lot of teams. I ultimately believe that he's also looking for that undrafted free agent, that priority free agent type. Started his career at Missouri, then went to Arkansas. 20 tackles for loss, 15 and a half sacks. He just had 4 sacks this past season there at Arkansas. Played 4 years at Missouri. Really his best year was in 2020, the COVID year. Played in 8 games, had 6 sacks in those 8 games. That honestly was probably his best year. That in 2021 ended up with 10 tackles for loss, making some plays behind the line of scrimmage. 6'4", 266, good size. David Agwebu of Houston, 6'4", 250. And with David Agwebu, he started his career at Oklahoma, was really a middle linebacker, if you will. Then converted to D-line there for Houston. And look, he had 109 tackles at linebacker for OU in 2022. Then as a grad transfer, hits the portal, goes to Houston, becomes a defensive lineman, ends up with 3 sacks. This guy is going to be a developing edge rusher. So he's not going to be a guy that you're going to be able to bring along right away. I think he's a guy that's probably going to get stashed on a practice squad potentially. Teams may even look at him and say, we want to move you back to linebacker where I thought you were a lot more productive. Be interesting to see what happens there. And then Solomon Byrd out of USC, 6'3", 255. Look, USC's defense, again, was historically bad, but Solomon Byrd was one of the few bright spots. I thought 51 flashed quite a bit. He started his career at Wyoming, 2019. 9.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. This past season for the Trojans, 11 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 4 forced fumbles. This was a guy that showed some explosiveness, some good bend. He just wasn't consistent enough, and that was really the big issue for him. I ultimately look at Solomon Byrd. I think he'll be a priority free agent, a guy that's going to try to work his way onto a roster that way, potentially be a practice squad guy. But that's kind of where I see that group trending. So if you're scoring at home with my defensive end group, I've got 3 coming off the board in round 1, LAtu versus Robinson. I got 3 in round 2, Trice, Robinson, Nealon, with the caveat that we could see as many as 5 in round 1 if Trice and Robinson both come off the board. Then you look at Adisa Isaac, who could be a round 2, round 3 guy. Austin Booker, the same thing. Right now I've got them in round 3 with Jonah Ellis and Brandon Dorlus. That's 4. You got 3 more in round 4 with Mohamed Kamara, Javon Solomon, Jalix Hunt. Then you get to round number 5, another 4 there. Brendan Jackson, Xavier Thomas, Javante Jean-Baptiste, Braden Greger. I got 2 in round 6 with Nelson Caesar, and then end of round 6, Miles Cole. And then in round 7, Yabi Okionoma, Cedric Johnson, Jalen Harrell. And look, you can flip-flop Miles Cole and Cedric Johnson potentially. That's been kind of that debate in my head, up in the air. I think there's some traits there with Miles Cole. You can't teach that wingspan, and he's a good athlete for his size, which may end up winning out, which ultimately is why I have him coming off the board in round number 6. So 22 total defensive ends. Again, meets that 5-year average of 22, and then 3-year average just one shy there with 23. Fewest since 2022 with 19, and honestly, it would be the 3rd fewest in those the past 6 years. If you want to include that 2024 draft with 22, because we saw 28 in 2021, 24 in 2020, and 23 in 2023. So this is a group that, again, the talent, you kind of see it mixed throughout. I think ultimately at the top and in the middle, that's really where you're going to see most of this class. I think it kind of starts to fizzle out, that strength on the back half, and really as you start getting into 6 and 7, that's where you don't see nearly as many guys coming off the board this year as we've seen in the past. So that's where I see the defensive ends lining up. We're going to do things again here in the next day or two, taking a look at the defensive tackle position. You've got Byron Murphy, you've got Johnny Newton there in round number 1. How many guys are coming off in round 2? What are we seeing in rounds 3, 4, and 5? Do we have any diamonds in the rough coming off the board in rounds 6 and 7? We're going to go ahead and break all that stuff down. I hope you'll tune in and check that podcast out as well. So At this point, we're going to go ahead and put a wrap to this one, though. So until next time, everyone, for ReadyForTheDraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. And until next time, I am out of here.